I'm robbing the bank.
Shoot him!
Hello guys and welcome back. So, as we all know, there were plenty of franchises that disappeared after a few bad films, but Pirates of the Caribbean should not have been one of them. What had started in 2003 as a risky Disney movie based on a theme park ride became one of the biggest blockbuster franchises in history. The Curse of the Black Pearl had exceeded every expectation, and Johnny Depp's unforgettable Captain Jack Sparrow became an instant pop culture icon, which even earned him an Oscar nomination. Over 5 films, the franchise grossed more than $4.5 billion worldwide, with Dead Man's Chest and On Stranger Tides both crossing the billion-dollar mark. So how did a franchise that had earned so much success get stuck up in such an awkward position? Because, after the 5th film, the momentum of the franchise just began to fade, and Pirates 6 spent years trapped in development. And due to that, Johnny Depp's future also became uncertain, and every new update just seemed to contradict the last. So today we're going to find out what exactly happened to one of Disney's biggest franchises. Let's begin. So, the idea of Pirates of the Caribbean becoming a blockbuster franchise seemed unlikely to work because the original concept sounded really bizarre in 2003. As Disney wasn't adapting a best-selling novel or a well-known comic book, it was trying to turn one of its own theme park ideas into a major Hollywood film. And back in 2003, the idea of theme park rides did not sound very promising for major Hollywood franchises, so the expectations for Pirates of the Caribbean were fairly low. On paper, Pirates of the Caribbean looked like a huge gamble rather than the start of a billion-dollar franchise. But it wasn't like Disney completely took a gamble. The studio assembled an experienced team with Gore Verbinski in the direction and Jerry Bruckheimer in the production, who was overseeing the film. However, the biggest gamble came from Johnny Depp. Instead of portraying Captain Jack Sparrow as the fearless and legendary pirate, Depp went for a completely different approach. He modeled parts of Jack's eccentric personality, slurred speech, and unpredictable mannerisms on Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, which gave the character an offbeat charm that nobody really saw coming. In fact, Disney executives were so confused by his performance during the production that they weren't sure whether Depp was reinventing the character or was playing Jack Sparrow the wrong way. Ironically, the very performance that made the studio executives nervous ended up becoming the heart and soul of the entire franchise. The film was released in 2003 and it completely exceeded everyone's expectations. The audience simply loved its unique blend of action, supernatural fantasy, comedy, memorable characters, and pirate adventure. The other thing that really helped the film stand out from most of the other blockbusters at the time was the chemistry between Johnny Depp, Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, and Jeffrey Rush. The film was roughly made on a $140 million budget, but it ended up earning around $654 million worldwide. Can you imagine that? And obviously this instantly ended up becoming one of Disney's biggest hits. After the first movie's success, Johnny Depp's Captain Jack Sparrow became the biggest attraction of the franchise. As people weren't just watching Pirates of the Caribbean, they were actually watching Jack Sparrow. The character actually ended up becoming a worldwide pop culture icon, and soon after, Jack Sparrow started appearing on merchandise, Hollywood costumes, Disney theme parks, video games, and was even constantly referenced in TV shows, movies, and online memes. Johnny Depp even received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for his performance in The Curse of the Black Pearl. And this was very unusual, as lead acting nominations for fantasy films have historically been quite rare at the Oscars. And from this point on, Captain Jack Sparrow became the identity of the franchise. Instead of losing its momentum right after its first success, Pirates of the Caribbean only grew bigger. Dead Man's Chest, 2006, raised the stakes with a grander story, the unforgettable Davy Jones, and groundbreaking visual effects that were way ahead of their time. The gamble paid off hugely, as the film ended up earning over $1.06 billion worldwide. So, the film not only became the first Pirates movie, but also the first Disney film ever to cross the billion-dollar mark, which firmly established the franchise as one of Hollywood's biggest blockbuster series. The original trilogy actually concluded with At World's End in 2007, which was an even bigger and more ambitious adventure that featured massive sea battles and one of the highest production budgets of its time, which was reported to be around $300 million. Although the critics were more divided this time, the audience still turned up in massive numbers, which helped the film earn nearly $961 million worldwide. And by the end of the trilogy, Pirates of the Caribbean had firmly established itself as one of the most defining blockbuster franchises of the 2000s. By the end of At World's End, the original trilogy had already completed its main story. But instead of letting the franchise end there, Disney actually decided to move forward with a fourth film as well. And this was the first time Pirates of the Caribbean was stepping beyond the storyline the audience had followed since 2003, and that also actually gave the series a fresh start. Some changes that were made in the fourth film were that Gore Verbinski, who was the director of the first three films, did not return this time. Disney brought in Rob Marshall as the new director. Along with that, Penelope Cruz has already joined the cast as a major new character with Johnny Depp. While Jack Sparrow remained the face of the franchise, many of the familiar characters and storylines from the original trilogy were no longer the main focus, as Disney was trying to reinvent the series while still keeping its biggest stars. On Stranger Tides was still a huge hit at the box office. The film earned around $1.04 billion worldwide, which made it seem that the franchise was just as strong as ever. But if you actually look a little closer, the numbers told a completely different story. If you compare this to the original trilogy, the film earned noticeably less at the domestic box office. Instead, most of its massive earnings came from overseas across multiple international markets. At that time, though, it didn't seem like a major issue, but it quietly just marked the beginning of a shift that turned out to be much more important in the upcoming years. This became the clearest sign that the franchise's popularity was shifting. Pirates of the Caribbean was now relying even more on international audiences than on North America. Of course, Disney wasn't very concerned at that time because the film had still crossed the billion-dollar mark, but this shift actually hinted that the overall box office momentum had begun to slow down. The concerns that were first seen with On Stranger Tides became much harder to ignore when Dead Men Tell No Tales released in 2017. Disney was expecting another blockbuster, but this time the numbers weren't nearly as convincing. And this was the turning point where the franchise's decline became very visible. The film carried a production budget of around $230 million, but unlike the previous films, its domestic box office performance was visibly weaker. The film opened to only about $62.9 million in North America, which made it the second lowest domestic opening in the franchise. And by the time it was done with its theatrical run, it had earned only around $172.5 million domestically, which was roughly $70 million less than what On Stranger Tides had made 6 years earlier. And at this point, it was becoming clear that fewer people were showing up for a new Pirates movie in North America, and Disney could no longer ignore that trend. Even though Dead Men Tell No Tales had such a disappointing performance, it still managed to earn around $794.8 million worldwide. However, more than $620 million of that total came from international markets. So, just like On Stranger Tides, the strong overseas performance helped hide the movie's weaker performance in North America. And while nearly $800 million sounds like a huge success for most movies, it wasn't the kind of result that Disney was expecting from a franchise that had already produced multi-billion-dollar blockbusters. The producer, Jerry Bruckheimer, defended the film's performance by arguing that unfavorable currency exchange rates had affected its worldwide earnings. He claimed that the film lost around 27% of its potential overseas revenue because of these changes. He also mentioned that under better exchange rates, Dead Men Tell No Tales could have reached the $1 billion mark. However, this was just Bruckheimer's explanation for the film's numbers and not an official industry conclusion. But the bigger problem was that the film's final numbers did not cover the entire story. With a production budget of around $230 million and the total costs rising to nearly $400 million after marketing and distribution, the film's large production and marketing costs meant its worldwide gross did not translate directly into an equally large studio profit. And for a franchise that had already delivered billion-dollar hits, this was not the kind of performance that Disney was used to. And in addition to all of that, the film also struggled with critics who felt that the series was becoming repetitive and had slowly started showing signs of franchise fatigue. Many also believed that the magic that made the earlier films stand out was beginning to fade, and for the very first time, the studio had to question whether the audience even wanted to return to this world. So instead of just quickly moving forward with another sequel, Disney became much more careful about deciding what the future of Pirates of the Caribbean should look like. But right after Dead Men Tell No Tales, most people expected Disney to just move on quickly towards another sequel. After all, the film did earn nearly $800 million worldwide, which would normally guarantee another installment for most franchises. But despite those numbers, Pirates 6 didn't immediately enter production. And that made the audience question why Disney hesitated when the franchise was still making hundreds of millions. While the worldwide total looked really impressive, Disney was likely paying more attention to the details behind those numbers. Disney may have been concerned by the huge decline in the domestic audience since On Stranger Tides, as the franchise was becoming increasingly dependent on international markets to reach huge totals. And Disney had to gear up the domestic audience, as overseas earnings could be affected by factors outside of the studio's control, such as currency exchange rates. And Jerry Bruckheimer had already pointed that out, as I have mentioned before. So these factors likely contributed to Disney becoming more cautious about whether spending hundreds of millions on another sequel was still worth the risk. Pirates was no longer a simple formula where Disney could spend big and expect another $1 billion in return. The production costs had grown massive, along with expensive sets, visual effects, and marketing campaigns. Usually, a film earning around $700 to $800 million sounds really successful, but for a franchise this big, it was no longer a huge win, and this uncertainty likely contributed to the slower development of the next movie. So, instead of immediately looking for a traditional sixth film, Disney started looking for different ways to continue the franchise. The studio began developing a new Pirates of the Caribbean project that would not completely follow Jack's story and have more of a fresh start. The early version of the reboot involved writer Ted Elliott, who had worked on the original films, and his goal was to keep creating new adventures while still keeping the spirit of the franchise alive. However, by the late 2010s, Disney's plans had shifted again, and the studio began exploring female-led Pirates movies, which featured Margot Robbie. Now, this was not supposed to be a direct Pirates 6, but rather another attempt to reinvent the series and introduce a new direction for it. The problem was never that Disney had lost interest in Pirates. The studio simply wasn't sure which version of the franchise the audience was really looking forward to. So they were simply caught between continuing the old formula and creating something entirely new. Now, by this point, the biggest question that surrounded Pirates of the Caribbean was no longer just about the story. It was uncertainty about whether Johnny Depp would return as Jack Sparrow. Since Depp had become inseparable from the identity of the franchise after 5 films, losing him was a major creative and business decision for Disney. Depp became involved in highly publicized legal battles during this time. There was the UK libel case involving The Sun and the later US defamation trial involving Amber Heard. And these events were ongoing at the same time that Disney was already reconsidering the future direction of Pirates. During this period, some reports and fan observations suggested that Depp's likeness became less visible in certain Disney merchandise, while the studio also began exploring ways to continue Pirates without having Jack Sparrow as the central character. And this was a very difficult move, as Depp's character had become the franchise's biggest selling point. While Disney was exploring a new direction for Pirates of the Caribbean, According to a contemporary industry report, there were discussions about bringing Johnny Depp back for a small cameo appearance to connect the old franchise with the new one. The report also claimed that Jerry Bruckheimer supported the idea, but that Disney declined it because of concerns about public image. This was also part of a broader industry trend, as Warner Brothers had asked Depp to step away from the Fantastic Beasts franchise around the same time, showing that major studios were reassessing his involvement in major projects. For Pirates, this created an even bigger challenge because Disney had to decide if they would continue without the actor most audiences connected with or find a way to bring him back. So by now, the studio was no longer just planning another sequel, it was also trying to figure out what the future of Pirates of the Caribbean would look like without Jack Sparrow. After Disney started exploring a new direction for Pirates, the Margot Robbie-led project became one of the main ideas that were being discussed. For years, various Pirates projects remained stuck in development without moving into production. Disney explored different writers and creative directions, which kept delaying the franchise's next film. Even after years of updates, it was still unclear which of these Pirates projects would move forward, or whether the next film would be a reboot, a spin-off, or a continuation of the existing franchise. Unlike normal sequels, where the audience knew what story came next, Pirates had multiple future possibilities that were all being discussed at the same time. One version involved moving forward without Jack Sparrow, while other reports suggested there would be a connection to the original movies. Due to these constant changes, it was hard to figure out what Disney's actual plan was. In 2026, the future of Pirates of the Caribbean became even more confusing as reports about Johnny Depp's involvement started contradicting each other. One February industry report suggested that the franchise could move forward without Depp and might involve Margot Robbie, although this was not an official Disney announcement. However, just weeks later at the Producers Guild Awards, Bruckheimer pushed back against that idea, saying, "First of all, that's not true." He also added that if it were his choice, Depp would return. This also matched his earlier comments from 2025, when he revealed that he had spoken with Depp about returning as Jack Sparrow, and he believed that the actor would consider it if the script were right. At the same time, industry reports also suggested that Disney was exploring different ideas, including a story focusing on Jack Sparrow's son. All of this showed that the real problem was not the lack of interest in the franchise, but Disney's struggle to decide what direction Pirates should take next. By early 2026, the biggest problem wasn't the lack of updates, it was that the updates kept contradicting each other. Within just a few weeks, multiple entertainment outlets had reported completely different futures for the franchise. This made it difficult for the fans to understand, as they were receiving several versions of Pirates 6 at the same time. One report suggested that Johnny Depp was out and that Margot Robbie would lead the next film, and then another report suggested Depp could still return in some capacity. Yet another report suggested an entirely new lead, which is Jack Sparrow's son. And these also weren't just random internet rumors. They were reports that were connected to comments from the producer, Jerry Bruckheimer. Despite all these reports, none of these ideas could actually make it into production. There was still no official cast announcement, no confirmed story, no greenlit plot, and definitely no release date. Every update just seemed to replace the previous update instead of providing real progress. Pirates of the Caribbean didn't just disappear quietly like many other franchises. Instead, it got stuck in a loop of changing plans and conflicting announcements. The people behind the franchise seemed unable to settle on one clear direction, which left the future of Pirates uncertain even after years of development. Despite all the uncertainty, Pirates of the Caribbean remains one of Disney's biggest and most successful film franchises. The total of 5 films have earned more than $4.5 billion worldwide, and the franchise itself also never ended officially. So, as of mid-2026, there is no officially confirmed 6th film in production. Several projects have been discussed over the years, but none of them made it to a confirmed production stage. Even today, there still isn't one clear plan for the future of Pirates of the Caribbean. A Margot Robbie-led Pirates project has remained under consideration for several years, but it has yet to receive a confirmed production schedule. At the same time, the reports about Johnny Depp's return also continue to resurface. Other rumors also suggest that the franchise could introduce a completely new main character instead. That is why the franchise finds itself in such an unusual position, as it didn't fail because it stopped making money, and it was never even canceled canceled officially. Instead, it just got stuck between several ideas, with Disney unable to decide which direction to take. And all of these make the story of Pirates of the Caribbean so interesting. It remains one of Disney's most valuable franchises, yet after all these years, nobody seems to know what its next chapter should look like. And that's what makes the Pirates of the Caribbean story so fascinating. This franchise earned over $4.5 billion worldwide and created one of the most iconic movie characters of all time. Yet, instead of moving smoothly towards another sequel, it has spent years in the same loop of different ideas, changing plans, and endless rumpus about its future. Most franchises this successful don't get stuck. They simply keep making more movies. But somehow Pirates became the expectation. Now, only time will tell whether Disney will eventually bring Johnny Depp back, move forward with a new lead, or take the franchise in a completely different direction. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and do let us know in the comments which direction you think Pirates of the Caribbean should take next. Until then, bye-bye. I'll see you in the next one.